Viburnum Burkwoodii Mohawk. Burkwood viburnum. Now, Viburnum Burkwoodii Mohawk, this is going to be a large deciduous shrub. Compared to the many evergreen viburnum species that we've done and many others that are used heavily in horticulture, there's also an equal, if not more, a higher number of deciduous viburnums, a tremendously important genus, okay? Now this particular one, as mentioned, a large deciduous shrub, 8 feet, 10 feet by equal width, notable for a couple of features, all right? First, as we remember with all viburnums, the leaf arrangement is going to be opposite. So opposite simple leaves for viburnum. Now with Viburnum Burkwoodii, one of the other neat features, if you can see that in the video, notice the glossy sheen. Do you see that glossy shine as I twist the leaf? Viburnum Burkwoodii, the young leaves, which emerge really early in the spring compared to most shrubs, all right, because all of these leaves have already emerged this spring. That shiny glossiness is a key thing to recognize Viburnum Burkwoodii, okay? Now, on the back side and on the stems, they're very pubescent, covered in pubescence or hair, really short, stiff hair. So it gives it almost a grayish white color looking on the back side, but the front, very shiny, glossy. Now, at the same time the leaves are emerging, what you have are the flowers begin to emerge. And the flowers, these actually are a cluster of cymes. And when they're in the bud form, the cymes are bright pink. So as you see from this small cluster of buds, they're bright pink in color. But as they open up, what they will transition to is a 2 to 3 inch diameter cluster of cymes. And these flowers are pungently fragrant. The entire flower cluster, 2 to 3, maybe 4 inches in diameter, maybe baseball sized. And all of those flowers pack a punch with very pungent fragrance, which is common for many of the viburnums. So folks, you've got deciduous shrub, opposite simple leaves that are glossy, shiny on the front, pubescent, silvery beneath, reddish pink buds before the flowers open, and then pure white to pinkish white flowers in cymes, terminally when fully open, and it's nose candy, pure pleasure. Viburnum X Burkwoodii Mohawk. Lincera sempervirens coral honeysuckle. Lincera sempervirens. Sempervirens means evergreen, all right? This is a native evergreen to semi-evergreen vine. All right, climbs primarily by wrapping or nutation, wrapping around something. Now, this is one of my favorite vines, native or non-native, and a lot of that has to do with the novelty of the flowers and of the form of the plant itself, okay? So, other than being a vine, the first thing I want to point you to are what the leaves look like. I'm going to hide the flower for a second and zoom in on those opposite leaves, okay? Lanceolate in shape. Simple, opposite, all right? That's the actual leaves themselves. The next thing I want to show you, just stay right there with the camera, is this really interesting structure here. Folks, that is a set of bracts that have been fused together. So the term used early in the semester in the vegetative morphology lecture, connate, C-O-N-N-A-T-E, connate, is in reference to the fusing of different pieces or structures. So it forms this kind of cup-shaped structure. That's the bract or bracts. And then what's at the tip? Well, here in the spring, you have these marvelous tubular-shaped flowers that are red in color. There are other cultivars that are yellows and oranges, but these really neat tubular flowers, red in color. Hummingbirds love these, by the way, with the cupped connate bracts wrapping around the base of the inflorescence, and then the leaves themselves lanceolate in shape, opposite simple. Pieris japonica, Japanese Andromeda. Pieris japonica, Japanese Andromeda. Folks, this is going to be in the ericaceous family, very similar to rhododendrons and azaleas, okay? And that means that it grows in similar conditions, partial shade, acid soils, all of those things, okay? We'll talk about that in the lecture portion. But this is going to be an evergreen shrub, all right? Typically in the 3 to 4 or 5 foot range, but in certain parts of the country, they can get 8, 10, maybe 12 feet, okay? So 3 to 12 feet perhaps with Pieris japonica. Now, I mentioned to you about it being evergreen. The leaves are going to be kind of world to alternate, clustered at the tips, all right? Leaves are serrated. I'm not going to spend much time on the foliage because number one, they're pretty nondescript, all right? Personally speaking. But secondly, there are floral features that I think are going to make Pieris japonica a lot easier to identify, all right? Let's start with the flowers, all right? Pieris japonica have terminal racemes, and these terminal racemes are kind of finger-like, kind of like these finger-like inflorescences out at the tips of the branches, and these racemes have urceolate flowers, those urn-shaped flowers, many different colors, whites, pinks, purples, all different kind of colors. Urceolate, pendulous racemes. And one of the other neat things, this plant will flower for weeks, but after the flowers fall off, one of the neat things about Pieris is that it retains its old inflorescence. Take a look at this. This is the inflorescence from last year. Last year's inflorescence will often persist on the plant, which is a neat ID feature, in addition to the current year's inflorescence, all right? Key feature for Pieris japonica. The last thing I'll mention about this plant is the new growth. As you can see here, the new growth has a really bright red color. And this new growth is just emerging, so in the days ahead, this will continue to get brighter and brighter red. And for about 1 to 2 weeks, the plant looks completely different with a red tinge to its foliage, plus all of these wonderful urceolate flowers. Hopefully, together will make identifying Pieris japonica pretty simple. Iris, just the genus Iris, for common name Iris, is all I'd like for you to know. Again, very broad, very popular, very old-timey traditional geophyte. Iris are some of the most, I think, diverse and some of the more colorful geophytes relative to the diversity of color and sizes and shapes that are available within this genus. All right, from an identification perspective, all right, a couple of neat things, all right? One is going to be the foliage, and not just the look of the foliage, but the orientation of the foliage, because these broad, flattened leaves, which typically are about 1 inch to 2 inches broad, come up and are in a flat plane, all right? Flat plane. So, Becky, if you can hold it on this side, right here, look at this. This is one cluster of leaves, and notice how glaucous they are because I'm wiping and you can see the bluish wax wipe off. But this flattened branch or cluster of leaves is so indicative of the genus Iris, okay? Whether it's a 6 or 8 inch tall plant or whether it's one of the larger 2 to 3 foot tall bearded iris types, these flattened branch-like clusters of the leaves are very, very distinct for iris, all right? Now, at the tip of the actual flowering stalk, you can have multiple flowers. Here's 1, here's 2, here's 3, here's a side one which will be 4. So you've got an actual inflorescence, flowering branch, which is also a bit different than other geophytes that we've learned. So each of these clusters will yield different shapes and sizes. This is one of the bearded types, and you know that by this cluster of hair here on the lower petal, okay? They come in a variety of colors. They're also noted as having a very distinct smell. If you've never smelled iris, most of you probably have. I encourage you to do it. It's one of the most pure, genuine, unique, just novel smells of all the flowers. So I can't give you a color scheme to look for or even a shape morphology scheme to look for because there's so many types within iris. But if you couple that flattened growth habit of the leaves, very flat in a single plane, coupled with the flowering stalks and then the overall bearded or not structure of the flowers, all of those things point to the genus Iris. Lamium maculatum beacon silver, spotted dead nettle. Folks, Lamium maculatum silver beacon. Now, Lamium is the genus that is most often associated with weeds that you may see in your lawn. And I'll show you that in lecture, okay? So tune in for that. But Lamium as a genus, now this is in the Lamiaceae family. So there's three things I want to remind you about this family. The leaves are opposite, the stems are square, and the flowers are bilabiate or two-lipped, okay? We'll see all of those features with this member of that family, all right? Now, Lamium maculatum. Maculatum, it comes from maculate, spotty, or blotchy, and that's in reference to the coloration that's on the foliage of this plant. Lamium maculatum silver beacon, or beacon silver, excuse me, is going to be a low-growing ground cover type plant, only about 6-8 inches tall. Grows well in partial shade, so you'll see these as ground covers in either sun or shade, and I think they're going to be pretty distinct relative to other plants that we've learned. All right, now first, as I've mentioned to you, come in and show you the leaves, and I will hold this still so Becky can zoom in. All right, leaves are opposite, stems are square, very pubescent. All right, opposite leaves. Oh yeah, look at that. Oh, look at that zoom right there. Good. Yeah, opposite leaves, square stems, and then the foliage is going to be a bright silver. Now the cultivar, beacon silver, is solid silver color in the center with only a fringe of green around the outside, okay? So just looking at the actual plant itself, almost it's more silver than it is green. I would describe it as a lime green color overall, looking at the foliage, again about 6 inches tall. Last thing I want to show you are the flowers, and I'm going to take this one here, and I will stay still and just let the videographer here do her work. But those bilabiate flowers are going to be this violet pink in color. This thing will flower from the spring right on into the summer, depending on the sun exposure and the overall health of the plant, but a long window of bloom time. Opposite leaves, silver in color, square stems, bilabiate, pinkish purple flowers. All of those things point to Lamium maculatum beacon silver. Tulipa, the genus for tulips. Without doubt, probably the most common of all geophytes. It's the plant you think of in the spring of the year, this and daffodils. Tulip is an incredibly diverse genus and a history as rich as any plant genus there is, okay? Look that up, or we'll talk about that a bit later. But all I want you to know is just the genus for tulip is Tulipa, all right? Lots of species. This particular genus is broken into categories similar to how Narcissus is or was, all right? Now, from an identification perspective, there's so many different types, all right? And I'm only going to ask that we look at and know the basic standard type of tulip, all right? And that starts with the foliage. Now, tulips are naturally bulbs. Bulb is the structure underneath for the geophyte, but they have some of the broadest, widest leaves of any of the geophytes that we've learned this semester, okay? So tulip leaves are often a foot, foot and a half long. This one is 3 inches wide, very glaucous, and glaucous, of course, meaning blue, covered in wax. And you can kind of see my fingerprints where I just wiped that off. So very broad, glaucous leaves. They're often wavy, okay? And if you take a look at the leaves of this particular one, they're just wavy in nature. But the broadest, widest of any leaf of any geophyte. And then, of course, the flowers, all right? On these tall scapes, and the flower colors basically are unlimited, except for pure blue and pure black. Two colors that plant breeders have yet to achieve, pure blue or pure black. But lots of actual perianth shapes into different tulips, but this is very traditional in its shape. And then, of course, you open that up, and a brilliant example of all the sex parts, large pistil with the stamens on the outside. But many, many colors of Tulipa. but know the foliage and then just a general tulip-shaped flower, and you'll be good to go for knowing Tulipa. Osmanthus heterophyllus goshiki, variegated false holly. Osmanthus heterophyllus goshiki, variegated false holly. Now folks, this is going to be an evergreen shrub, all right, with variegated foliage, one of the few plants or few true cultivars that we've learned this semester. So let's start there. Evergreen plant with variegated foliage. Now, Osmanthus heterophyllus goshiki, this is going to be a plant 4 to 6 feet tall most commonly. Yeah, there's situations it gets larger than that. But like the other Osmanthus we have learned, Osmanthus fortunii, this is opposite foliage, all right? And this one will have the juvenile growth. The growth on Osmanthus heterophyllus is very much holly-like, covered in spines when it's juvenile, and only when the plant is very mature does it transition to the mature leaves with entire margins without the spines. But this cultivar goshiki was selected because, number one, of that cream-colored yellow variegation of the foliage, and because of that, it's staying in its juvenile form, you're going to most always see it in that spiny juvenile form, okay? So coming in a little bit closer, just to confirm the opposite leaves, all right, which is true of all Osmanthus, opposite leaves, and then you see that really dark, really cream-colored modeling, if you will, of the foliage, which is that cultivar type, goshiki. So looking at the plant itself, and I'll get out of the shadow, hopefully you can really see that really nice yellow foliage, juvenile spiny leaves, opposite, which means it cannot be a holly, all right, which is the reason it's called false holly, and it's one of the only yellow variegated plants that we've learned, all right? So Osmanthus heterophyllus goshiki, opposite, yellow variegated leaves, key ID feature. Phlox Subulata, moss pink. Phlox Subulata. Now, folks, this small ground cover-like plant here in front is our moss pink. Now, this is actually an evergreen plant, closer to being a small woody shrub than a herbaceous perennial. And that's one of the surprising features about Phlox Subulata. So this is an evergreen small plant, only about 4 or 5 inches tall, all right, mat-like, right across the ground, carpet-like growth. Now in the spring, right about late March through April, the flowers on this is really what makes Phlox Subulata special. It's what makes it planted so heavily. And the flowers, they got beat pretty hard by the rain last night, but this example it'll bounce back. But when this is in full flower, folks, you can barely even see the foliage, okay? And these individual flowers are going to be salverform in shape. Let's see if I can break one off. There we go. Salverform flowers. How does that look? Does that look good? Mm-hmm. Salverform flowers. They come in pinks and whites and purples and different shades of those 3 colors, okay? This low-growing mound-like plant. Now, right over here, I'm going to zoom in just carefully and just show you what the foliage looks like. And I'm only showing you that because when it's not flowering, this is the only thing you have to identify it by, the foliage, and probably more importantly, the form, this mat-like, carpet-like growth. But for the purpose of any exam, you will have the flowers of some color showing those salverform shape of the flowers, plus the floriferousness of this mat-like growth and flowering habit of Phlox Subulata moss pink. Aquilegia canadensis columbine. Aquilegia canadensis columbine. Folks, this is one of our most awesome native herbaceous perennials. Early spring, herbaceous flowering perennial, gets about 1.5 foot tall. Got a couple of interesting features. The leaves are going to be compound. What type compound? Trifoliate. 3 leaflets, a trifoliate leaf on Aquilegia canadensis. One of the few trifoliate leaves that we've seen. Now, flower-wise, here in the early spring, you see these marvelous pendulous flowers that have these 4 long spurs at the back of the flower, all right? So if you look at them on the plant or here in my hand, you've got these pendulous, neat flowers with 4 long spurs that are pointed down. The inside throat is most always going to be that nice yellow, and then you can see the stamens on the inside. But if you couple the fact that this is a herbaceous perennial, leaves are trifoliate, and then these nodding, spurred flowers, red in color, other colors exist of Aquilegia. All right, you can see the lecture portion for that, but this is one of our most common, really cool, early flowering herbaceous perennials. Caria Japonica, Japanese rose. Caria Japonica is going to be a deciduous shrub, 3 to 4, 5 feet tall, equally as wide, notably having bright sulfur yellow flowers, okay? Before we get to the flowers, which is one of my favorite plants actually, I'm going to talk about the foliage, all right? The foliage of Japanese rose, Caria Japonica, going to be alternate, simple leaves. The individual leaves are deltoid or triangular and doubly serrated. So the leaves of Caria Japonica, alternate, simple, doubly serrated, and deltoid. Now, one of the other things that hopefully you can see at the base of these leaves is that little tiny stipule. The stipule is not a key ID feature, but I wanted to point it out because new leaves, when emerging in the spring, will often have those stipules for a matter of days or weeks before they fall off. And I just wanted to point out the stipules to you, okay? So, very distinct foliage. Deltoid, doubly serrate, very key. Another feature about this before we get to the flowers, the green stems. The stems of Caria Japonica will stay green for years before eventually turning gray or brown with very old age, okay? So, green stems, alternate, simple, doubly serrate, deltoid leaves. And then to the flowers. The most pure sulfur yellow flower that I know of, and I know I've said that with Forsythia and Jasminum, but this one is just a really neat, a simple flower, brilliant yellow in color, as is true with many members of the Rosaceae family, 5 petals and a big cluster of stamens. One of the most phenomenal plants, in my opinion, is a cultivar of this, and that is Caria Japonica pleniflora. And pleniflora is a double flowering form, which is one of the most stunning flowers on any landscape plant. Take a look on the lecture and you'll see those already posted, okay? So, in review, you've got a deciduous shrub, green stems, alternate, simple leaves, deltoid, doubly serrated, and then these bright sulfur yellow flowers, different than Jasminum or different than Forsythia based on the shape alone, plus the individual leaf structures. That in mind, don't forget Caria Japonica, and don't forget to recycle. Asculus Pavia, red buckeye. Folks, this is going to be a native deciduous small tree. Asculus Pavia, red buckeye. Now, Asculus is a fairly large genus with a couple of really neat identifying features, all right? Opposite compound palmate leaves. Opposite palmately compound leaves. They produce a buckeye fruit or a little nut that you may have seen or be familiar with. And then they also have very unique terminal buds on the end of the branches, all right, called pseudo-terminal buds. So all of those features describe Asculus as a genus. Now this, Asculus Pavia, being the only buckeye we're going to know, the only Asculus we're going to learn, all of those features will hopefully make it easy to recognize this plant. All right, so coming in a bit closer to take a look and confirming what I said about the leaves being opposite, all right, and each individual leaf, sorry about the wind blowing frantically, and there's one individual leaf showing the palmate type, all right? So we haven't done many or any palmately compound opposite leaves. And then the other neat thing that should make identifying Asculus Pavia easy this time of the year are these beautiful inflorescences. Folks, these panicles are terminal panicles, 4 to 8 inches tall. Individual flowers on the panicle are going to be tubular shaped flowers. And these flowers will stay on for a week, 10, 12 days, something to that nature. And then in the fall of the year, as you will see on the lecture portion, it'll produce this leathery, cased nut, and the nut itself will be about the size of a golf ball, and it'll be like a bright mahogany reddish orange color, but really pretty cool, all right? So, opposite palmately compound leaves, terminal panicles of red tubular flowers, hopefully will make Asculus Pavia a plant to identify. Coral bells, Heuchera. Heuchera, just the genus, is all I want you to know for this group of plants. And you will find out quickly why I'm only asking you to know just the genus, all right? And that has to do with the number of different types of Heuchera that are available. And as long as you can recognize them as a group, I think you're going to be fine, okay? So just Heuchera sp, common name coral bells. Now folks, coral bells are going to come in a variety of sizes, colors. Sorry about the wind, all right? And the key ID feature is going to be a herbaceous perennial that's got a rounded or globe-shaped form, okay, like these. The foliage color can be nearly anything, okay? But I'm just going to remove one leaf to actually show you that one of the common forms, I broke the petiole off, there's the petiole, all right, here's the petiole, which has escaped me. Here's the blade, and they're very commonly reniform or kind of kidney shaped. So Heuchera, coral bell leaves, kidney shaped, all right? They attach right at the base, they're almost subpetiolar, okay? I'm gonna leave that right there, and I'm going to get another one. And what I hope you can see is the petiole attaches just underneath the leaf. So it's subpetiolar, all right? Most leaves attach right at the edge. This one's kind of at the back, so subpetiolar leaves. They are very pubescent. The video can show those hairs that are shining, pubescence. But folks, simply put, rounded, bright foliage color, reniform shaped leaves that are subpetiolar. And then in the lecture portion, you can see the different flower spikes that come up in the summertime with a variety of different colors and sizes. Heuchera coral bells.